In this lecture, I'm going to show you how to configure static NAT on DC router. That's the data center router. So what I've got in this topology, I've got a router 1 and it's connected across the internet to a data center router. There's a couple of hosts on private network addressing. So router 1 is going to be configured to for port address translation. That'll translate private IP addressing to a single, in this example, a single public address on router 1 public interface, and that's 1.0. Then on this, on the data center, I'm going to configure static NAT. So I'm going to map a private to public IP addressing. So server 1 is a web server, and it's going to have it's got a private IP address of 192.168.3.1. And I'm going to map that statically to the public interface 1.0 on this data center router. So it'll be a static one-to-one mapping. So whenever I ping from host 1 to server 1, there'll be a translation to a public address, a single public address this time, not a pool, on router 1. And then it'll be forwarded over to the data center, and it will do a one-to-one mapping from the public outside IP address to a private IP address on the inside. And conversely, when the packets go from server 1 to host 1, it'll do a private to public static translation as well. So what I'm going to do, I'll start on router 1. I'll just sign on. The first thing I want to do is I want to configure the inside interface for router 1. So I'm going to go interface FA20, and I want to do an IP address. So it's going to be a private IP address because it's LAN inside interface. So that'll be 192.168.1.3, and then give it a subnet mask. The next thing I want to do is define that as the NAT inside interface. So this is similar. This is port address translation from the previous lecture. Then I'm going to do a no shut. So now I've defined the private addressing, the private interface or private network address zone. Okay, so that's available now. Now I want to do the outside interface. That'll be 1.0. Then I'll do IP address. This will be a public address this time. And that is just the IP address 172.33.1.1 is public. Then I want to do IP NAT outside, saying it's going to be the public address for NAT. And then a no shut. Okay, so what I've done is I've just started this. So there it is there. It's assigned on the outside interface. It's the outside NAT interface, or IP NAT outside for router 1. Now I'm going to configure this. I'm going to configure the translation command, the overload command, IP NAT inside source list 100. Actually, I probably should do this first. I'll do the access list first. That just permits traffic from the private address space to be NATed. So I'll go up, this is a public command. So there it is there, 192.168, that's what the hosts are on. And the next thing I want to do is configure overload. In this case, you'll notice I'm using a different command. I'm not defining a pool this time. I'm defining a single command. So it's IP NAT inside source list 100, so it's pointing to this, saying allow these private IP addresses across to be NATed. And I'm using this time the interface FA10 overload. So I'm saying use the only single public IP address on that outside interface on router 1 to the overload, and that's the 172.33.1.1. And that's all there is to it. And that's all done. Now we'll go to the DC router, and I want to configure a couple of interfaces there. So what I'll do is I'll start with the inside interface, and this is going to be static NAT. It'll be interface FA20. What I'm going to do here is I'm just going to assign it an IP address. So in this case, I'm on the inside interface, and this is where the server 1 is connected. So the default gateway, actually, it's 20. That's just the inside NAT interface. So I'm going to assign that 3.3 and make it the inside NAT interface. And then the outside I'll do as well. This will be IP address 192.168.3.3, and server 1, the web server, will be 3.1. So that's configured. Now I want to say it's the IP NAT inside interface, and then do a no shut. Okay, and that interface is up. Now we'll do the outside interface on the data center. And that's going to be that will be 10, and I'm going to put 172.168.1.254 on that. And that'll be the outside interface. So with this one here, this will be 1.254 on the 10 interface. This is 1.1, so they have to be in the same subnet. So it's going to be interface FA10. IP address 172.33.1.254. Then IP NAT outside, and then just no shut. And that's done. So next thing to do, now the interfaces are done on the data center router. I'm just going to now do a source statement, a NAT statement, static NAT. So what this does, this actually does the static NAT translation between the public address and the private address. I'm using the port 80 because this is a web server, so I want to include the application port in the command as well. We'll just go over to the data center router. This is a global command, so let's go up one level, paste it in. So IP NAT inside source static, so it's a one-to-one static mapping only between the outside public interface on that data center router and the inside web server address 3.1. And 80 is because it's an application port 80. It's a web server. So that's done. So at this point I can do some testing. So I'm going to ping 1.254. I'll ping the public interface on the data center router. And this example here, I'm going to ping from host 1 right to here, because this is what's visible. This server 1 is private addressing, so it's not advertised to these hosts. They only know of public addressing, because it's an internet address. So you have to send, and if you want to, the host would send a request for this server to a public address because it's across the internet. So go to command prompt, ping 172.33. Could be a cloud server as well. .254. So it's going to send some pings there. And there's the reply, so it's got there, arrived. I'm going to try it again. Okay, so that works fine. And at that point, what happens is, I'm going to show you at this point, show you two things. Actually, no, before I do this, I'm going to do something else. Because this is a web server, I'm going to go and I'm going to start a browser session as well. So what I do is I do the same thing, use the same address. So So why can't, so this web browser is actually opening up on server 1. So the static NAT is working. This 172.33.1.254, that's actually the address of the outside DC DC public interface. But DC1, the the data center router, is doing static NAT, so it's taking that translation and translating here. So then the packets are actually going over to server 1 based on a private address, and that's what that proves, because there's no web browsing on the data center router. It's actually getting from server 1. So if we go over here, I'll go show IP NAT translation. And there it is there. So you see where it's translating it between 172.33.1.254 and the web server address of 192.168.3.1. That's a private address. So that's working quite well. If we go over here, I can just verify that it's working as well. I'll show you the NAT table. There it is there. So it's NATing between 172.33.1.1 only and 192.168.1. If I did something from host 2, it would just add something to the table as well. So I did do, for instance, I go 172.33.1. Same address, so there it is there. And if I go over to the router and just do that command again, now it's got them both in there. Different port numbers though, so they're different network addresses. And that concludes static NAT.